Thank you very much, Dennis. And whenever you initially give out what we're talking about, a sense of panic was overcoming me. But then I reflected that when I first went to the Assembly, there was one minister in particular that us young whippersnappers then were seeking to trip up and ask difficult questions to. And the civil servants had prepared a pack of questions. And it didn't really matter what question you'd actually asked him, he just delivered something from the pack, so I could have just given my speech in any event, Dennis, irrespective of what the topic was. But it is a great pleasure to actually be here this evening and to address this summer school, which has such a history of respectful and insightful discussion. And the event is now firmly established in the public policy calendar throughout these islands and beyond. So could I especially commend Dr. Joe Mulholland for his dedication to the school, the countless painstaking hours that he has spent trying to chase down people like me for panel discussions, and his patience is definitely commendable. Could I start with an apology that in recent years, despite Joe's best efforts, the Democratic Unionist Party hasn't been represented at the MacGill Summer School. Some of you might understand that July is a fairly busy month for some of us. I should point out, and I said at the start of Mary Lou's speech when I heard the tone of it, that I wouldn't rise to it, but I will have to point out one thing. The member of the Assembly, the DUP member for the Assembly for the area, that effigy was burnt of Martin McGuinness, condemned it immediately. Arlene Foster also came out and condemned it very quickly thereafter. And either Mary Lou is out of touch because she's in Dublin, or she's telling this audience a blatant untruth, because the facts will tell you that I'm right. I don't want to get into that sort of politics tonight, but I cannot let that particular one go. I believe that the Democratic Unionist Party, it's been roughly a decade since we've been last up here, but nonetheless, Maurice Morrow was one of the previous speakers, and that was way back in 2005. And in that backdrop, whenever Lord Morrow addressed this distinguished event, he was speaking at a time whenever the Democratic Unionist Party had become enshrined as the voice of unionism through the United Kingdom general election, where 9 members of Parliament were elected. He also spoke against a backdrop where the Northern Ireland Executive had collapsed and direct rule ministers were governing Northern Ireland. And today, 12 years later, we meet against the backdrop of yet another historic UK general election. This time the DUP have won 10 of Northern Ireland's 18 seats. However, it is hugely regrettable that just like in 2005, we meet against a backdrop where Northern Ireland Executive has collapsed and direct rule government from London looks inevitable again for Northern Ireland. I say that regrettably, as Northern Ireland is governed best by local ministers making local decisions. And for the record, and those of you who don't follow the various talks processes in Northern Ireland very closely, the DUP leader, our leader, Arlene Foster, would form an executive tomorrow morning. Should have formed it this morning, should have formed it yesterday. As would the SDLP, the Ulster Unionist Party, the Alliance Party. But Sinn Féin, themselves alone, is blocking an executive being formed, a power-sharing executive for Northern Ireland being formed. This is all the more disappointing, given that this week saw the commencement of the second round of talks in the United Kingdom reference the exit from the European Union. Whatever side of the referendum debate you were on, and I could hazard a guess that I might be in a minority here, being someone who wants the UK to leave the European Union, we can all agree that it will have a huge impact upon the lives of everyone living in these islands. Brexit is undoubtedly the single biggest current political issue, either locally, nationally, or at an EU level, and probably the biggest political development for at least a generation. A majority of people across the UK have voted to leave. It was a national referendum, and that result should be and will be implemented. To do otherwise would be to stand democracy on its head. Now, I recognise that a majority of people in Northern Ireland voted to remain, and we should not ignore the concerns or indeed fears that many of those people have. And I've been to the fore in advocating that the days of remain and leave are over, that we all must work together to get the best deal possible for Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland will be the only part of the United Kingdom that shares a land border with the European Union. Everyone wants to see a successful outcome, which can ensure that movements across the border, which have always taken place, will continue to take place post-Brexit. But there is no denying that our ability to get the best Brexit deal that works for Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic is severely hampered by the fact that there is no Northern Ireland executive. Last week, the European Union's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, met the Scottish First Minister and the Welsh First Minister. Frustratingly, though, Michel Barnier met no delegation from Northern Ireland, as the executive doesn't exist. On Monday of this week, as they kicked off the latest round of negotiations, the Brexit Secretary, David Davis, explicitly said that Northern Ireland was one of the 4 key issues that Her Majesty's Government and the EU be focusing their initial work on. Yet once again, no Northern Ireland voice is being heard at this most crucial of junctures in the negotiations. Northern Ireland continues to be denied its own locally elected administration because Sinn Féin have placed the Irish language over and above things like setting a budget, progress on important health reforms, and of course dealing with our exit from the European Union. This reckless approach to further a political objective will only serve to damage everyone in Northern Ireland, and in a Brexit scenario, it is bad for everyone on this island. I'm personally fed up hearing my party being parodied as being opposed to other cultures just because we say that our priorities at this time should be health, education, jobs, and indeed Brexit. Such criticism is especially irritating when it emanates from the mouths of members of a political party, which means ourselves alone, and is utterly lacking in any understanding of what it is at the ideological core of Protestants and Unionists in Northern Ireland. We've just marked the 327th anniversary of the Battle of the Boyne, with some of the most peaceful and well-attended celebrations in living memory. At times we tend to concentrate on the events of the 12th itself rather than what we are commemorating. The Orange Order stands as strong for civil and religious liberty today as our forefathers did in the late 17th century. Those of us who truly cherish the glorious revolution and all that it gave us understand that as much as we are celebrating our own culture and way of life on the 12th of July, we are equally celebrating the ability of all to celebrate their culture and their ways of life, however they wish. Anyone who speaks and loves the Irish language is as much a part of Northern Ireland life as a collarette wearing orange man. I want them to feel at home, to feel respected and part of society. Unionists aren't opposed in principle to the use of the Irish language, or indeed some form of legislative provision for it in Northern Ireland. How can we be, when we reflect on our past, or indeed consider what other constituent parts of our United Kingdom have done? In Scotland and Wales, legislative protections have been put in place for Scots Gaelic and the Welsh language. So legislating for language clearly isn't something that is unique to Northern Ireland. In fact, when we reflect on what has already happened in Scotland and in Wales, it is completely in keeping and celebrating the diversity that epitomises the modern United Kingdom. Minority languages legislation isn't in any way anti-unionists. So why then have we not agreed to legislate for the Irish language in Northern Ireland? Donegal is a county where the language is very much alive. I came through the Gaeltacht earlier on. And in this part of the world, the Irish language is everything it ought to be. It isn't threatening. It isn't politicised. It isn't used to exclude others. It isn't used as a weapon in a cultural war. It's just a natural, normal part of everyday life. What my party opposes is the introduction of Irish language legislation that is more about developing a sense of national identity than it is about supporting the language and the culture. We are all for assisting and encouraging those who want to use Irish as part of their lives. Indeed, under our stewardship, some £171 million was directed to the Irish language in the course of the last Assembly mandate. What we don't want is for Irish to be imposed upon those who don't choose to speak it. We don't want to see bilingual road signs everywhere in Northern Ireland. We don't want a quota for Irish language speakers in the public sector. And we don't want a commissioner with punitive powers in sanctioning public authorities. Any legislation must respect the reality that more than one culture exists in Northern Ireland. So if we're to build a better future than the past we have lived through, then there is no place for cultural supremacy. Northern Ireland may be a small place, but I firmly believe that there is sufficient space for all cultures to thrive side by side. Sinn Féin's demands in the Irish language have been characterised by the Alliance Party as looking for the sun, the moon and the stars. What's needed now is a recognition of the sensitivities surrounding this subject and a much more realistic approach from Republicans. Such a realistic approach will allow us to focus on matters such as Brexit, which will shape the British Isles for the next generation rather than endless rounds of meaningless talks. My party colleagues have already used our influence at Westminster to deliver for the good of Northern Ireland. MPs will continue to ensure Northern Ireland interests are protected in the Brexit negotiations, but it should be the Northern Ireland Executive playing this role, not one political party. I can only think of two reasons why anyone might want to absent themselves from the Brexit negotiations. The first is that you really believe that other local demands are more important than the issues at stake in these negotiations. I don't believe that for 1 second. It doesn't tally with the numerous statements about how Brexit is the most important issue to face us and why it should be our top priority made by people within Sinn Féin. The only other option is that you're actively choosing not to be part of the process because either you don't want to be associated with any tough decisions, and Sinn Féin has history in that, or because you actually are hoping that a bad outcome will provide another platform for something like a border poll. Neither of these reasons provide a particularly positive backdrop for a party holding up progress. The second option is particularly damning, but also for many people provides the most likely explanation as to why Northern Ireland is voiceless in this process. There is little point in rehearsing every issue that has been the subject to debate since devolution was collapsed in January. I wanted to see devolution up and running again. That means an executive with ministers from both political traditions working together and taking decisions. And despite the claims sometimes made that there is no serious voice within unionism who does not support power sharing, and there is only a tiny fraction of unionism who will not share power with whichever party or parties receive the support from the nationalist community. The issues holding up the restoration of devolution currently are small when compared to the issues facing the DUP and Sinn Féin prior to May 2007. Indeed, the issues holding up the restoration of devolution do not even compare to some of the massive challenges that were faced and overcome around the executive table during the last 10 years. Such issues can be resolved when there is respect present on both sides, and there is a willingness there on both sides to find a way forward. I sat at the executive table for just over 6 years, and I witnessed at first hand many of the issues where agreement was sometimes extremely hard to find. There is little doubt that the personal willingness of someone like Martin McGuinness to seek that agreement played a very positive role on many occasions. The theory that we may not be in the political difficulties that are currently being experienced had Martin McGuinness still been present is one that has been put forward by a number of people, including my former party leader Peter Robinson. It is not a theory that I find myself able to disagree with. I, of course, can't offer an opinion from outside in relation to Sinn Féin, but can speak with certainty about the DUP and our leader, Arlene Foster. I've been part of the DUP talks team over the last number of months, and I can say that categorically we have approached all of the talks with a positive attitude and a willingness to find agreement. This is a sentiment echoed across all sections and levels of the party, and is one personified by Arlene Foster. She's the same person who worked very positively with all parties around the executive table in the past. I now know that she, as much as anyone else, wants to see this happen again. A shared society is not an anemic society where there is no room for difference. It is one where difference can and must be accommodated. The DUP and Sinn Féin have two very different worldviews on Brexit. Yet last summer, after the European Union referendum, Martin McGuinness and Arlene Foster were able to pen a joint letter on a number of issues where there was common good re-Brexit. And the realities of Brexit and the need to secure the best possible outcome for the people in Northern Ireland as well as the Republic of Ireland will require that some positive attitude, the same positive attitude across a range of relationships. The United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland are closely intertwined, always have been. And not just because of the land border we share. The United Kingdom provides the single biggest market for produce originating in the Republic of Ireland, particularly in the agri-food sector. For Northern Ireland too, the rest of the UK is our single biggest market, and access to that market is of the highest priority. Much reference has been made to the Belfast Agreement and the importance of North-South relationships within that document. That is indeed true. Whilst, of course, the common travel area existed long before the Belfast Agreement, whilst the European Union is not specifically mentioned in the Belfast Agreement, East-West linkages most certainly are. There are not just between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, but it's also about the Republic of Ireland's linkages with Great Britain. There is a much greater argument, and possibly a much more achievable argument, that special status should be granted to the Republic of Ireland within the European Union, rather than Northern Ireland sitting outside the EU. Such an approach will not suit those who appear determined to prove that Brexit is a bad idea, and their way to prove that is the worst possible deal. Punishing people, however, should not be anyone's idea of a successful outcome. Currently, the single best way we could all ensure the people of Northern Ireland are not unduly punished for anything relating to Brexit must be to see the restoration of devolution and to ensure that we have a seat at the table when decisions are being taken. Back in 2005, when Lord Morrow stood in this room, the prospect of Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness being able to form a government seemed remote, but it happened less than 2 years later. In 2017, the prospects seem as equally bleak of the Northern Ireland Executive being restored. Northern Ireland can't afford the uncertainty of the prolonged stalemate. As a Northern Ireland Protestant, Orangeman and Unionist, I want to see a government at Stormont working with London, Dublin and Brussels to ensure that we all succeed. At 52 years of age, my children are flying the nest, making their own way in life. I want to be able to for them to set up home in Northern Ireland. And if we're blessed to have one day have grandchildren, I want them to be able to get good jobs close to home. I have the same desire as every parent and grandparent. And for that reason, we need to get the right Brexit, we need to get stable government in Northern Ireland, and there needs to be less focus on the narrow political interests. Finally, a thought for us all. Marn a Kivar and Val a Kiva Warren on Lovey Ducur. Now, forgive my broken Irish, I haven't a lot of experience in it. But for those of you who, like me, are not that fluent, it translates to the branch living on the hedge, though the hand that planted it is dead. It's an old Irish saying, and it reminds us of our mortality, and that our actions today will live long after we are gone. May we work together, both north-south and east-west, to ensure the best for all the people who live in the British Isles. Thank you.